The rain had started before dusk and never really stopped. By the time Karie flipped the cafe sign to closed, the street outside shimmered like black marble, slick under the dim glow of the old iron lamplight. Wind tugged at the awning above the windows, and the air smelled like damp brick and burnt sugar. Inside, everything was hushed: polished mahogany tables, stacked chairs, the soft hiss of the espresso machine cooling off for the night. She liked this hour best. The noise of the city faded just enough to hear herself think. Karie Conley moved like she always did when the last customer was gone, deliberately, quietly, with sleeves rolled up and her hair tied back in a neat twist. Her black shirt was still buttoned to the collar, apron lightly dusted with flour and coffee grounds. The others had left already, their laughter still echoing in the hallway behind the kitchen. She stayed, wiping down the counter until it gleamed. Not out of obligation, but because it grounded her. The cafe meant something. Not because it belonged to her, it didn't. But because it was stable, familiar. She knew every scratch in the marble, every creak in the floorboards. It was the one place in the city where she wasn't invisible, even if nobody really knew her. She poured herself into each cup she made, a habit passed down from her grandmother. A little orange zest in the crema, a hint of cinnamon when she was feeling nostalgic. Most people didn't notice, but she did, and that was enough. Outside, the rain deepened to a steady drumbeat against the windows. Karie paused, breathing in the mix of espresso and citrus, preparing to shut down for the night, when the front door opened. The bell above it didn't chime. It never did when it was pushed slowly, deliberately. A man in a tailored black suit stepped inside. Tall, composed, dangerous in a way that didn't shout, only whispered. He didn't look at the menu. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, letting the door swing closed behind him. Karie straightened behind the counter, fingers still damp from wiping down a demitasse. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "We're closed." His eyes flicked up. Cold. Calculating. Then he stepped forward and said 5 words that would rip her world apart. "Who made this coffee? Before we continue, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories that you won't want to miss." Karie didn't move when he asked the question. "Who made this coffee?" His voice didn't rise or demand, it just lingered in the space between them, calm but cutting. Like he already knew the answer and was testing her. She cleared her throat and said the words that would tie her life to his: "I did." He didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't thank her. He just stared. He held the tiny porcelain cup in one hand, the steam curling into the air like a ghost. Then, slowly, he set it back on its saucer with the kind of precision that made Karie's pulse tick faster. "Interesting," he said finally, eyes still on her, as if trying to peel back her skin to see what lived beneath. She fought the urge to shift her weight or look away. The rain whispered louder against the windows, but neither of them seemed to hear it. "I'll be back," he said, adjusting the cuff of his jacket. She had the sense it wasn't a promise. It was a warning. Then he turned and walked out, leaving the cup behind, untouched except for the 2 careful sips he'd taken. The door closed so softly, the bell didn't even ring. The air felt heavier after he left, like he'd taken the oxygen with him. Karie stared at the cup for a long time, then reached for it and washed it by hand, even though it was against protocol. The scent of cinnamon and citrus still lingered on the rim. She scrubbed it clean, but the heat in her chest remained. She didn't sleep much that night. The next day, he came back. It was earlier this time, mid-afternoon. He didn't wait in line. Didn't ask for a menu. Just took the same seat by the window, hands folded in front of him, suit still pressed to perfection. Karie froze when she saw him, but then her body moved before her mind could catch up. She made the espresso just like before. Same grind, same blend, same spice. Her grandmother always said consistency was a kind of kindness. She served it without a word. He took it with a slight nod and finally smiled, just barely. "You remembered," he said. She didn't answer. She wasn't sure if he was praising her or testing her. But he took another sip, slower this time, and let it settle. "Most people ruin espresso. Yours tastes like something lost." Karie swallowed hard and nodded once. That became a pattern. He came again. And again. Same time. Same table. Always alone. He never asked her name. But he always waited for her to serve him, even if another barista was closer. The others started to notice. Whispers started behind her back. "That guy's money," one of the cashiers murmured. "Serious money. Armani suit, every time. Who even is he?" Karie didn't know either, not at first. But she felt his presence like gravity. A silent force that pulled everything toward it. On the fifth visit, he brought something with him. A black envelope. He didn't hand it to her directly, just left it on the table after he finished his drink and walked out. Curiosity gnawed at her, but caution overruled. She left it for the manager. He opened it. Inside was a tip, 10 crisp $100 bills. No note. No name. The next morning, one of the dishwashers caught Karie near the employee lockers. "You know who that is, right?" he said, voice low, eyes darting toward the front of the cafe. "That's Omero Boni, head of the Boni syndicate." Karie blinked. The name meant nothing to her, not yet. "He's like a ghost," the dishwasher added. "Owns half the docks," whispers in City Hall. No one talks to him, and no one talks back. Karie tried to shake it off, but something inside her twisted. He came again that night, but stayed longer. The cafe was emptying, tables being wiped, the clink of cutlery winding down. Omero sat quietly, watching the rain, espresso untouched in front of him. Karie tried not to notice. But then he caught her eye and said, "Join me." She hesitated, but sat. For a while, he didn't speak. Just listened to the jazz spilling from the ceiling speakers. Then, at last, he turned toward her. "This coffee," he said, swirling what remained in his cup, "my mother used to make it like this. In Palermo. Before she died." His voice was low even. But Karie could hear the ache beneath it. "She used orange peel, like yours. Cinnamon, too. But she stirred it with a sprig of lavender. Said it softened the bitterness." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I didn't mean to imitate her," Karie said softly. It's how I was taught." Omero nodded. "It doesn't matter. You brought something back. A ghost I thought I'd buried." Karie didn't know what to say to that. She wanted to ask how she could possibly matter to someone like him. But instead, she just sat there, and he seemed content with the silence. When she rose to leave, he reached out, not to grab her, just to pause her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Karie," she replied. He nodded once. "Karie Conley." The way he said it made her breath catch. Like he'd already known. Like he just wanted to hear it from her lips. She walked back behind the counter, but her hands shook the entire time. After he left, she checked her phone. A new message. No name, no number. Just a text, "You make more than coffee, Karie." She deleted it. But the words stayed. The staff kept whispering. The tips kept growing. And Omero kept coming. Always her. Always the same seat. Always the same silence, but with a weight that grew heavier every visit. Karie started to change too. She stopped using the break room. Ate alone. Watched the street more closely. She began to wonder if someone else followed her besides Omero. One night, while taking the trash out behind the cafe, she spotted a man in a car, engine idling, lights off. He didn't move. Just sat there, watching. When she stepped toward him, the car pulled away. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't sleep much either. The next evening, after close, Omero stayed behind again. The staff had gone. The lights were low. Karie leaned on the bar, exhausted. "You look tired," he said. She didn't bother denying it. "I could make things easier for you," he added. Karie raised an eyebrow. "How?" "Remove the noise," he replied. "Protect what matters." That sounds a lot like control. He didn't argue. He stood then, leaving a stack of 20s beside the empty cup. "You make something special," he said. It'd be a shame if someone else got to it first. Before she could ask what he meant, he was gone again, the door swinging shut behind him. That night, Karie watched the street outside her window until dawn. And somewhere around 4 a.m., her phone buzzed again. "Don't worry about the man in the car. He won't come back. No name. Just that." Karie stared at the screen, then turned it face down. She didn't know it yet, but she was already being watched by more than just him. and the choices that followed would no longer be hers alone. The walk home used to be Karie's favorite part of the day, a quiet stretch between neon-lit storefronts and slanting brownstones where the city seemed to take a breath. That night, though, she felt it before she saw it, something in the air, stretched too tight. Her keys jingled in her pocket with every step, loud in the silence. When she reached the corner near her building, she slowed. A black sedan idled across the street, headlights off, but engine purring like a cat with its eyes half closed. She didn't pause, didn't give it the satisfaction of her fear, but her fingers curled tighter around the strap of her bag as she climbed the stairs to her apartment building. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled, watched. Inside, she double-locked the door and turned off the lights, heart thrumming louder than the rain tapping the window panes. She didn't sleep. Not really. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined that car moving closer. She couldn't tell if it was paranoia or intuition, but by now, she'd learned to trust the tension that sat like a weight in her ribs. It didn't lift in the morning either. When she stepped outside, the car was gone, but something told her it hadn't gone far. The cafe didn't offer its usual comfort. The lights felt too bright, the steam too sharp, every clang of cutlery like a warning shot. Karie made herself busy grinding beans, restocking sugar, refolding the dish towels, but her eyes flicked to the front door every few minutes. Omero didn't show up that morning. Somehow, that made it worse. After her shift, she told the others she'd stay late to close up, but the truth was she didn't want to walk out with anyone else. She didn't want witnesses. She moved through the cafe like a ghost, dimming lights, wiping surfaces already clean, checking the locks twice. Then she stepped into the alley behind the cafe and froze. Someone was waiting. The man didn't move at first. He leaned against the wall like he belonged there, cigarette glowing faintly between two fingers. The alley was narrow, the brick slick from rain, the back door a foot behind her, too far now. She stepped back instinctively. "I wouldn't scream," the man said, his voice casual but edged. "Wouldn't help." "I don't carry cash," Karie replied, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "And I don't care who you are." "I'm not here to rob you," he said, dropping the cigarette to the ground and crushing it under a polished boot. "I'm here to deliver a message." He stepped into the light, mid-30s, scar under his eye, expensive jacket over something armored beneath. Not a mugger. Not a cop. Definitely not a stranger. "You're in Omero Boni sights," he said flatly. "And that makes you a target." Karie's mouth went dry. "By who?" she asked. "By everyone else," he said, shrugging. "Men like Boni don't just walk into cafes because they like the crema. When they start showing interest, other families start asking questions. Questions turn into threats. And women like you." He gave her a once-over. Collateral. She wanted to call him a liar. Tell him to leave. But her pulse was roaring in her ears, and her hands had gone cold. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because I was told to," he said. "And because you deserve to know you're not invisible anymore." He turned and walked off without another word. Karie stood there in the alley for a long time, rain soaking through her shoes. She didn't go home that night. She couldn't stand the idea of her apartment, of silence, of shadows in the hallway. She walked. Downtown, across the bridge, through the park that smelled like wet stone and dying leaves. Then finally, when her nerves frayed past reason, she called the one person she knew wouldn't be surprised. Omero answered on the second ring. "You need to stop," she said, not bothering with a greeting. "I'm listening," he said evenly. "I don't want this," she said. "I don't want your bodyguards, your envelopes, your surveillance. I don't want to be a message or a pawn or whatever this game is you think we're playing." There was a pause. Then, "Where are you?" "Don't," she said, jaw tightening. "Don't send someone. Don't come. Just listen." She was standing under the awning of a shuttered bookstore, voice low but firm. "Someone approached me," she continued. "In an alley. Told me I was being watched. That I was a target now, because of you." Omero exhaled, but she couldn't tell if it was frustration or restraint. "I'll handle it," he said. "That's not the point," she snapped. "You don't get to upend my life just because I made you a good cup of coffee." Silence again. Then his voice came through, colder than she expected. You're no longer just a waitress, Karie. She blinked. Excuse me? You're not just a barista to me, he said. You're not neutral. Not anymore. You don't get to decide that. I already have, he interrupted, quietly but with finality. And it comes with consequences. Karie shook her head, the wind cutting through her jacket. You don't own me. No, he said. But you're mine. That's not the same thing. Her breath caught from anger or fear. She wasn't sure. You need to leave me alone, she said. You need to stop coming into the cafe. You need to stop sending people. You need to let me go back to my life. He didn't answer. The line stayed open, but there was only silence. Then, finally, his voice dropped low, almost soft. You don't get to choose anymore. I've already chosen. The call ended. Karie stared at the screen, heart hammering. In that moment, she realized something terrifying. It wasn't just that Omero had marked her. It was that he'd made her matter, and in his world, that kind of attention came with a price. A car pulled to the curb across the street. No headlights. No one stepped out. Karie turned and walked in the other direction, wind slicing through her hair. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. But in her chest, a quiet fury bloomed, one she didn't yet know what to do with. Not yet. If someone powerful decided you were theirs not out of love, but obsession, what would you do? Would you run, fight, or stay long enough to find out why? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to see how far Karie's story goes, subscribe now because this is only the beginning. The cafe was dark when Karie arrived the next morning, the kind of dark that made her stomach twist. Yellow police tape flapped across the glass doors, curling in the wind like a ribbon tied by a ghost. A squad car idled nearby, lights off, a single officer leaning against the hood with a coffee cup in hand. Karie stepped closer, rainwater seeping into the canvas of her shoes. The officer didn't even look at her until she reached the tape. Gas leak, he said, bored. Nothing to see here. Buildings shut down until further notice. Karie blinked, scanning the windows, trying to peer inside. She knew this place. She would have smelled a leak, felt something off the day before. Was anyone hurt? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The cop shrugged. Nobody was inside when it happened. Lucky break. His words landed flat. Karie knew a cover story when she heard one. This was clean. Too clean. Like someone had prepped it, not patched it. She turned away slowly, pulling her phone from her pocket to call her manager, but the screen was black. Dead. She pressed the power button again. Nothing. She'd charged it overnight. Fully. It had been fine just that morning. Panic started to flicker beneath her ribs. She tried a payphone at the corner, one of the few still left in the city. The line buzzed with a dead tone, like it wasn't connected to anything at all. Her palms began to sweat. She walked 3 blocks to the library, used their public computer to log into her email. Password rejected. She tried another. And another. Then she tried her name. Account not found. Karie sat back in the plastic chair, staring at the glowing screen. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't random. Someone had started erasing her. She left the library and went straight to her apartment. Her key turned in the lock, but when she pushed open the door, the breath left her lungs. The space was empty. Not just cleared, scrubbed. Her furniture was gone. Dishes. Curtains. Even the rug her grandmother had braided by hand. Only the scent of bleach remained. She stood in the center of the room, slowly spinning in place. Her chest rose and fell like a bird beating against the bars of its cage. She opened the hall closet. Her winter coat gone. Her name was still on the mailbox downstairs, but that felt like an oversight. She wasn't scared anymore. She was furious. Karie stormed back outside, the city blurring around her. Her feet carried her toward the only person she knew had the power to orchestrate something like this. She didn't know where Omero Boni lived, but she knew he'd find her if she walked fast enough, furious enough, loud enough. She didn't make it to the end of the block. A black car eased up to the curb beside her. Window down. A man in the passenger seat leaned out. Miss Conley. It's time. She turned to run, but another man was already behind her. There was no struggle. Just a cold hand on her arm, a prick at the base of her neck, and darkness swallowing her whole. When Karie came to, it was light. Sunlight filtered through tall windows dressed in ivory drapes. Her body was wrapped in something soft, sheets maybe. She tried to move and found her limbs sluggish, like her muscles were still underwater. A faint floral scent hung in the air. Jasmine and lavender. She sat up slowly. The bed was massive, far too grand for a hotel. Cream linens, gold trim. A carved headboard and a crystal lamp that cast soft reflections across the wall. Her clothes were gone, replaced by a thin robe. Panic tightened in her throat, but before she could scream, the door creaked open. A woman entered. Late 50s, dark hair pinned neatly back, apron crisp over a black dress. "You're awake," the woman said gently. "I've brought water." "Where am I?" Karie asked, voice hoarse. "Mr. Boni's estate," the woman replied. "Near Lake Michigan." "I want to leave." The woman didn't flinch. "You're safe here." Karie laughed bitterly. "Prisoners don't need reassurance. I've laid out some clothes for you," the woman said, ignoring the jab. "Mr. Boni will be down later." Karie stood, shaking slightly. "Are you going to stop me if I walk out the front door?" The woman looked her dead in the eye. "You won't make it far." She left the water on the nightstand and stepped out, the door shutting with a soft click behind her. Karie dressed in silence. The clothes were modest, gray slacks, a soft black blouse, and low-heeled boots. Nothing fancy. Nothing hers. She found no mirror in the room. No phone. No clock. When she stepped into the hallway, she was met by marble floors and towering ceilings. The walls were painted a warm ivory, lit with sconces that flickered like candlelight. Everything smelled expensive. Everything was designed to soothe. It didn't work. She walked, turning corners, looking for signs of an exit. Every window she passed was sealed. Every hallway monitored by silent, stone-faced men in suits. Finally, she reached a long gallery with glass walls on one side. Beyond them, Lake Michigan, vast and silver, waves slapping softly against the rocky shore. She pressed her hand to the glass. It was cold. Solid. No latch. Footsteps approached behind her. "You're not supposed to be down here." She turned. A tall man stood in the doorway, not Omero, but someone who bore the same polished cruelty. His eyes swept over her, not with desire, but calculation. He didn't offer his name. "I wasn't aware there were rules," Karie said flatly. "You're not a prisoner," he said. "But you're not free either." "Good to know." He nodded toward the stairs. "Come. He's waiting." They led her to a sitting room filled with antiques, floor-to-ceiling shelves, and a fire already crackling in the stone hearth. A sleek espresso machine rested on a tray nearby, polished to a shine. Karie felt its presence like a slap. Omero stood by the fire, his back to her. She didn't wait for him to speak. "You've ruined my life." He turned slowly, dark eyes steady. "I saved it." "You erased me," she snapped. "Tore me out of the world like I never existed." He nodded once. "Because you were about to vanish anyway. Just not by my hand." Karie blinked. "The men who approached you, they weren't bluffing," Omero said. "You had a target on your back the moment I walked into that café. I didn't put it there. But I'm the reason it matters now." She stared at him, heart hammering. "You made yourself part of my world," he continued. "And in my world, that has consequences." "I made you a drink," she hissed. "You made me remember." Karie's breath caught. For a second, she saw something flicker in his face, pain, raw and buried deep. "You'll stay here until I decide it's safe," he said. "You'll be protected. Federal. Given whatever you need. Except freedom." He nodded. "Except that." Karie stepped forward, fists clenched. "You don't get to control my life." "I already do." The room fell silent, except for the soft pop of the firewood. "You think this is protection," Karie said. "But it's a cage." "No," Omero replied. "It's a vault." "A vault?" she echoed. He stepped closer. "You don't put something ordinary in a vault," he said. "Only things that can't be replaced." Karie didn't reply. She couldn't. Her voice was trapped somewhere behind the ache in her throat. She turned and left the room. The guards didn't stop her. But the walls, the locks, the glass, they didn't need to. She was already gone. The woman who knocked at Karie's door the next morning looked like she had walked out of a silent film. Her posture was perfect, her clothes immaculate, black blouse, long gray skirt, a brooch at the throat. "Good morning, Miss Conley," she said, her voice warm but practiced. "I'm Valentina. I oversee the estate's domestic wing." Karie sat at the edge of the massive bed, blinking through sleep, unsure whether to stand or scream. Valentina entered with a tray of breakfast items: fresh fruit, cappuccino, warm bread, and soft cheeses arranged like an offering. "Mr. Boni instructed that you be made comfortable," she added, placing silverware with exact care. "If there's anything you need, wardrobe, toiletries, books, simply ask." Karie opened her mouth to speak, but found no words that fit the situation. "You may find this place strange," Valentina continued, adjusting the drapes, "but I assure you, you are quite safe here." Karie watched the woman move with effortless grace, like someone who'd done this for decades. There was no fear in her, just quiet efficiency. Still, Karie couldn't help but notice the way Valentina avoided eye contact too long, or how she never let her back fully turn. It reminded her of zookeepers who were kind to lions, but never forgot they were still lions. "What is this place?" Karie finally asked. "A sanctuary," Valentina said. "For some." Then she left, gently closing the door behind her. Karie stared at the untouched food, appetite drowned by the weight of too many locked doors. The lake glimmered beyond the window, beautiful and unreachable. She had never felt so fed or so trapped. Over the next 2 days, Karie explored what she could. The estate was sprawling, a maze of quiet hallways, walled gardens, art rooms, and sunlit reading nooks, all pristine, all patrolled. Every turn she took, she found a man in a suit pretending not to watch her. They never spoke unless spoken to. But the message was clear: this wasn't a home. It was a holding cell in silk and stone. She tested every door, some opened, most didn't. The ones that did led to places meant to impress her: a library with rare first editions, a music conservatory, a solarium filled with plants she didn't know the names of. But the exits? Always locked. Always guarded. Her presence was tolerated, curated, but never forgotten. Once, she tried to slip out during a linen delivery at the rear terrace. A gate had been left slightly ajar, like an accident. She made it 3 steps past it before a voice behind her simply said, "Don't." She turned to find Luca, tall, unreadable, polite as ever. "Not like this," he added, almost kindly. Then the gate closed behind her with a metallic snap. By the 3rd day, the silence was louder than any gunshot. She stopped talking to Valentina. She stopped accepting meals. She stopped pretending she wasn't unraveling. It happened on the 5th night. The halls were unusually quiet. She had wandered toward the east wing after a restless dinner. The scent of cedar and something faintly floral trailed through the corridor like a memory. And then she heard it: low, melancholic piano music drifting from behind a door slightly ajar. It stopped her mid-step. Each note was deliberate, slow, soaked in sorrow. Not polished like a performance, but broken, raw, like someone bleeding onto the keys. Karie stepped closer, the sound tugging at her ribs like a string. She didn't mean to linger, but her hand found the frame, her breath caught in her throat. Inside the room was Omero. He sat alone at the grand piano, sleeves rolled, jacket discarded. A glass of dark liquor rested on a small table beside him untouched. He didn't see her at first. His fingers moved over the keys with surprising gentleness, like the man she had met in the café had disappeared, leaving someone else behind. Karie could have walked away. Should have. But she stepped inside. Omero's hands slowed as if he sensed her, even before he saw her reflection in the polished lid. He didn't speak, didn't move, only let the final notes fade like smoke. Then he looked up, his expression unguarded for the first time. "I didn't know anyone was listening," he said softly. "I wasn't trying to," she replied, unsure why her voice came out a whisper. "That melody," he began, eyes drifting toward the keys. "My mother wrote it. She played it at night when the world was too loud for her to sleep." He paused. "It was the only thing that calmed me as a boy." Karie didn't know what to say. The tension between them wasn't dangerous now, it was intimate. like something fragile had cracked open in the quiet. He stood, crossing the room in a few slow steps. "I didn't bring you here to punish you," he said. "I brought you here because I couldn't afford to lose you." She frowned. "You don't even know me." "I know your coffee," he said. "I know your defiance. I know that your presence shook something awake in me I thought was long dead." Karie shook her head. "That's not love." "No," he agreed. "But it might be the beginning of something close." She looked up at him, searching for the predator she'd met in the alley, the kingpin behind locked gates. Instead, she saw a man caught between grief and control, obsession and vulnerability. A man who knew how to burn cities and how to play lullabies for ghosts. "This place is beautiful," she murmured. "But it's still a cage." Omero nodded. "I know." His voice dropped to something almost reverent. "That melody, it used to calm me. Now it's you." Karie's breath caught again. The words weren't romantic. They were a confession, quiet, heavy, terrifying in their own way. She didn't run. Not that night. She stood there with him, between the notes and the shadows, uncertain of everything except the fact that she was already deeper into his world than she had ever intended to go. If someone saw you not as a person, but as the only thing that kept their darkness quiet, would you feel flattered or afraid? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story's melody is starting to haunt you too, subscribe now, because Karie's silence is only the beginning of her voice. The next morning, Karie woke with the taste of piano notes still in her mouth. It lingered like lavender, bittersweet, unfinished. The walls of her room, once suffocating, now felt oddly quiet, as if the house was holding its breath. She hadn't seen Omero since the night in the study, but the weight of his words still pressed against her chest. "Now it's you." She wasn't sure what scared her more, the fact that he'd said it, or that part of her didn't want to run anymore. Valentina entered with her usual grace, setting breakfast on the table like a ceremony. "Mr. Boni will dine privately this morning," she said, adjusting the corner of a folded napkin. "But he asked that you be given access to the kitchen if you wish it." Karie blinked at her. "The kitchen?" Valentina's eyes met hers just long enough to imply permission without explanation. Sometimes, memory sits best in the hands. She found the kitchen empty, save for one quiet sous chef who nodded once and disappeared through a swinging door. It was modern, all cold steel, soft lights, and polished stone, but there were remnants of something older tucked into the corners. A small ceramic spice rack. A chipped teapot. And near the sink, a mortar and pestle worn with years of use. Karie's hands moved on instinct. She gathered the ingredients from memory, not hers, but her grandmother's. The zest of orange shaved delicately into a bowl. A dash of cinnamon, measured by smell not spoon. And finally, a pinch of dried lavender, crushed into the mix until the fragrance rose in a soft bloom. She closed her eyes and let it carry her to a different time, different walls, a tiny kitchen in Indiana where the floors creaked and the warmth was real. She didn't ask permission before preparing the espresso. She tamped the grounds with the pressure her grandmother had taught her, firm, not angry. The machine hissed quietly, steam curling like breath from a sleeping mouth. She added a delicate touch of the spiced foam on top, just as she had done the night he first walked into her café. Then, without thinking too long, she carried the cup herself to the study. Omero was there, seated at the desk, fingers idly tracing the rim of an empty tumbler. His head lifted when she entered, surprise flashing in his eyes. He stood slowly, as if unsure what version of her he was getting today. Karie said nothing. She set the cup down in front of him with quiet finality. He looked at it like it was a relic. "Is this?" She nodded. "Same blend as before, but made for today." Omero picked up the cup, fingers steady but his jaw tight. He inhaled first, deeply, as if bracing himself, then took a sip. Time folded in on itself. The expression on his face didn't break, but something behind his eyes flickered, then cracked. He set the cup down with a reverence that made her stomach tighten. "She used to stir it with a sprig of lavender," he said, voice lower than she'd ever heard it. "My mother." She said bitterness didn't mean the end. It just meant you had to pay attention to the finish. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "That's the first time I've tasted that coffee since I buried her." Karie stood still, hands clasped in front of her, heart thudding against her ribs. She hadn't meant to reach him. Not like this. But watching him now, unarmored, she felt the shape of his grief like a tide brushing against her ankles. She owned a café in Palermo, Omero continued, eyes drifting to the window. Small. Nothing fancy. She called it La Cura. The cure. A bitter smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. She believed people didn't just need caffeine. They needed comfort. I think she was right, Karie said quietly. He looked at her then, something fierce and wounded rising behind his eyes. You gave that to me, he murmured. That first night. You didn't know it, but you brought her back. Karie's throat tightened. I didn't mean to, I know, he interrupted. That's what made it real. The space between them pulsed, charged with something unsaid. Karie felt it pressing in, slow and electric. She didn't move away when he stepped closer. She didn't flinch when he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Why didn't you run? He asked. I tried, she whispered. He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. They stood in silence until the cup between them cooled, untouched a second time. That night, Karie couldn't sleep. The memory of Omero's voice, raw with confession, echoed in her head. She sat at the window, legs curled beneath her, eyes scanning the quiet lawn below. Guards paced like ghosts between hedges and shadows. The moon hung low over the lake, and everything seemed unnaturally still. Then a knock at the door. She rose, heart leaping once, but it wasn't Omero. It was Luca. Stern as always, eyes sharper than normal. Don't eat anything tonight, he said, voice clipped. Nothing that comes from the kitchen. Karie blinked. Why? He hesitated. We intercepted a message. Someone may have tried to poison him. Her blood ran cold. Him. Luca nodded. Routine security test flagged something. He didn't drink it. He almost did. Karie gripped the edge of the door. Who? We're investigating, Luca replied. But the guards have already turned the entire east wing upside down. She stepped back into the room, brain spinning. Is he okay? For now. Luca glanced behind him, then back at her. Keep your door locked. Don't trust the staff unless they come directly from me or Valentina. He turned and disappeared into the corridor. Karie shut the door slowly, heart pounding against her ribs. She didn't eat that night. Didn't sleep. Didn't know who to trust. She sat by the espresso machine in her room, staring at the cup she'd prepared for herself but never touched. Everything felt different now, sharp, exposed. Her blend had opened a door between her and Omero, but now someone else wanted to slam it shut. She thought of his mother's café, La Cura, of the way he said her name with reverence and regret. And she realized memory wasn't just powerful, it was dangerous. If it could bring comfort, it could also become a weapon. She just didn't know yet who was willing to wield it. The tension in the villa changed after the poisoning attempt. It wasn't spoken aloud, but Karie could feel it in the way the guards glanced at each other, in the clipped voices that carried through the marble halls. Something underneath the surface had cracked. Even Valentina's careful composure frayed at the edges. And Omero. Omero vanished into meetings and silence. Karie was no longer the most watched person in the house, but somehow, she felt more exposed. She kept to the east wing, avoiding the kitchen entirely, her appetite smothered by unease. Omero hadn't said a word to her since Luca's warning. Not about the poisoning. Not about her coffee. Not even about the melody she now caught herself humming in the quiet. One afternoon, restless and cornered by the weight of stillness, Karie wandered into the unused wing of the house, an older part, with dust on the railings and tapestries that hadn't seen light in years. She wasn't looking for anything. But sometimes, trouble finds those who move quietly. As she passed a cracked door near the rear stairwell, she heard a voice. At first, she thought it was a recording, sharp, clipped Italian, muffled by stone walls. But then she recognized the voice. Tommaso. Omero's consigliere. His right hand. The man who stood behind him at every table like a shadow with teeth. Karie stilled, pressing herself beside the wall just outside the door. Inside, she could hear only fragments of the call, but it was enough. Confirmed. She's here. He won't suspect me. A pause. No. He's too focused on her. That's the point. Her blood iced. There was no time to think, only to act. She backed away, careful not to let the floor creak, heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would give her away. The moment she turned the corner, she ran not with panic, but with urgency, like her body already knew there wouldn't be much time. She found Luca near the garage entrance, mid-conversation with two security men. When she grabbed his arm, his expression sharpened instantly. "Where's Omero?" she asked, breathless. "Upstairs." "Why?" "I heard Tommaso. He's selling information about me to the brevettas." Luca didn't question her. He just nodded once and said, "Stay here." But she didn't. Karie followed him through the hallways, each turn sharper than the last. They reached Omero's office just as the doors flung open from the inside. Omero stepped out, eyes narrowed, already braced for conflict. "Tommaso," Karie said. "He's the leak." Omero looked at her, then at Luca, and for a moment the hallway went still. "Where?" she told him. Omero didn't blink. He turned and barked an order in Sicilian none of them needed translated. Within minutes, 3 guards broke off and headed toward the stairwell like hounds loosed from a leash. Omero didn't follow. He turned back to Karie, and his voice was razor-thin. "What exactly did you hear?" She told him. "All of it." When she finished, he didn't speak for a full beat. "Then, you shouldn't have been down there." "I know." His gaze searched hers, something like apology flickering, then gone. "You saved my life," he said. "You already saved mine," she replied. But neither of them would get the chance to talk further. That night, Valentina knocked on Karie's door and told her she'd been scheduled to accompany a delivery detail to one of Omero's private roasteries. "Just for the day," the woman said. "He wants you out of the villa, off the radar, until the Tommaso situation is fully resolved." Karie hesitated. Every instinct bristled. But Valentina's voice was kind. And Karie wanted to believe it. The next morning, she left in a black SUV with 2 guards and a van in tow. They drove through the city, taking back roads, not speaking much. The windows were tinted, the sun was sharp, and Karie stared at the blur of buildings and people and wondered if the world even remembered her name anymore. They stopped at a loading dock beside a warehouse with no sign. The lead guard stepped out first, talking into his radio. The second opened Karie's door. And that's when everything went wrong. The first hit was swift, not to her, but to the driver. A blur of motion, a flash of silver, and blood sprayed against the windshield. Karie screamed, twisting in her seat, but a cloth came down over her mouth before the sound could finish. Something sharp jabbed into her neck, and then the world melted into black. She awoke in cold, her cheek pressed to damp concrete. The air smelled of mildew and old incense. When she opened her eyes, she saw high ceilings, cracked stained glass, and the skeletal remains of pews. A church. Abandoned. Hollow. Her wrists were bound. Her ankle, too, chained to a rusted pipe bolted into the floor. Her head throbbed. Blood crusted at her temple. Footsteps echoed through the nave. A figure stepped from the shadows. Tall, well-dressed, with a cruel smile carved beneath cold eyes. Raldi Brevetti. The head of the Brevetti family, Omero's enemy, by blood and by business. "Welcome to Sanctuary," he said, voice smooth as oil. "We don't get many saints anymore." Karie pulled herself upright, every movement sending pain through her ribs. "You won't get away with this," she rasped. "Oh, cara mia," Raldi said, crouching in front of her, "I already have." He ran a gloved finger along her jaw, slow and deliberate. "You know what the problem with men like Omero is?" he asked. "They pretend they have no weaknesses. But there's always something. A soft spot, a memory. A barista." Karie stared at him, refusing to flinch. "You're the weakness," he said, voice almost gentle now. "And I'm going to break him with you." He stood, adjusted his cufflinks, and turned his back. Behind him, 2 men with weapons flanked the altar. "Make her comfortable," he said over his shoulder. "She has a role to play." Karie looked up at the stained glass above her, a cracked image of a saint with eyes weeping red. She was no saint. And if she was going to survive this, she couldn't wait for rescue. She'd have to save herself. Time blurred in the cold of that church basement. There was no sense of hours passing, just the rhythm of dripping water and the sound of boots on concrete. Karie's wrists burned where the ropes bit into her skin. Her throat ached from thirst, and her body shivered despite the stale heat rising from the old radiators. Still, she said nothing. Silence became her only weapon. Raldi Bravetti had visited her twice. The first time, to gloat, to tell her Omero's men were searching, but too slowly. The second, to make promises dressed as threats. "He'll come for you," Raldi had said, his voice almost affectionate. "And when he does, I'll make him wish he hadn't." Karie had stared straight through him, refusing to flinch. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of her fear. The men who guarded her weren't nearly as patient. They mocked her accent, her quiet defiance, the café girl turned captive. They made jokes about her hands, how delicate they looked for someone who brewed such fire in a cup. One even offered to untie her if she made them a real espresso, laughter echoing like a punch. She didn't answer. But somewhere deep inside, an idea began to take root. She watched them closely, the way they took their breaks near the rusted counter in the corner, where an old camp stove and dented kettle sat unused. She noticed the bag of instant coffee one of them carried, cheap, bitter stuff. They brewed it thick and black, pouring from chipped mugs and leaving half of it unfinished. It wasn't much, but it was routine. Predictable. And routine was where survival lived. That night, when one guard, a stocky man with a scar on his lip, came to leave her a bottle of water, she asked, voice soft, "Can I make it for you?" The question stopped him in his tracks. "What?" he grunted. "Coffee," she said, nodding toward the kettle. "You say mine's the best. Let me prove it." He laughed, thinking she'd broken. He didn't realize she was setting a trap. They untied her wrists long enough to let her work. She moved slowly, every motion deliberate, like muscle memory guiding her more than thought. She crushed a few of the sedatives Raldi's medic had left in a drawer, pills meant for sleep, not death, and mixed them with the grounds. A subtle scent of orange zest still clung to her from the café, and she used it, pretending to add spice. The guards leaned closer, smirking. Karie smiled too, the kind of smile that hides fire behind porcelain. When she handed out the steaming mugs, she sat back and waited. The first to fall was the one with the scar. His head hit the table with a dull thud. The others laughed until their words slurred and their eyes drooped. Within minutes, half the room was slumped in drugged sleep. Karie didn't hesitate. She grabbed the keys from one man's belt and ran. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel through hell, flickering lights, peeling paint, a locked door at the far end. Her bare feet slapped against the floor, echoing too loudly. Behind her, someone shouted, "She's up." She shoved the key into the lock, twisting. It stuck. She twisted harder, heart hammering like a drum in her chest. The door swung open. Cold air hit her face. She stumbled into the nave, breath sharp, lungs burning. Outside, beyond the cracked stained glass, moonlight cut across the pews. She sprinted for the main entrance, hands shaking, fingers fumbling with the latch. But before she could pull it open, something heavy struck her from behind. She hit the floor, vision flashing white. Hands grabbed her hair, dragging her backward across the stone. "Nice try," a voice hissed. "The boss said not to bruise the face, but I might make an exception." Karie struggled, kicking, nails clawing at the man's arm. The barrel of a pistol pressed against her temple. "Stop," he growled. She froze. The room spun around her, cold, damp, merciless. He cocked the gun. "Good girl." And then, everything exploded. The sound wasn't thunder. It was closer, harder, a crack that tore the air apart. The man behind her jerked violently. Blood sprayed her cheek. His body fell sideways before her brain even caught up. Another shot followed. And another. The far door burst open, with splintering, and through the smoke and echo came Omero Boni. He was a storm in a tailored suit, face grim, eyes burning with something past rage. A rifle hung from his shoulder, a handgun in his hand, the barrel still smoking. He didn't speak, didn't hesitate. Every step was a death sentence. Every man who raised a weapon died before his finger met the trigger. Karie crawled behind a pew as chaos erupted. Bullets ricocheted against the marble. Men screamed and fell. The scent of gunpowder mixed with blood and incense until it burned her lungs. She watched him move, swift, merciless, the same hands that had played his mother's song now dealing retribution with perfect precision. When the last echo faded, only silence remained. Karie's body trembled as she stood, one hand braced on the pew. Omero turned toward her, chest heaving, a red line streaking his shoulder where a bullet had grazed him. His suit was soaked in blood, some his, most not. For a moment, he didn't look like a savior. He looked like vengeance dressed in flesh. She took a step forward. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he said, voice low. "Are you all right?" "I was," she said sharply, "before you made me your target." He froze. The words hit harder than any bullet. Karie's face flushed with anger and exhaustion. "You don't get to play hero. You don't get to destroy my life and then rescue me like it makes you clean." She stepped closer, trembling, adrenaline turning to fury. "You don't own me, Omero." He met her eyes, pain flickering behind his composure. "I never said I did." "Yes, you did," she snapped. "Every time you said I was yours. Every time you called what you did protection. You built a cage and called it kindness." Omero's jaw tightened. He took a step toward her, lowering his gun. "You've never been caged," he said softly. "You've been guarded." Karie stared at him, torn between disbelief and something deeper. His voice carried no arrogance now, only exhaustion, a confession without apology. He stood there, bleeding, haunted, looking at her like she was the only part of the world still worth saving. And for a fleeting second, she hated how much she wanted to believe him. The church was silent except for the distant crackle of flames from a toppled lantern. Shadows danced along the cracked walls, painting the scene in gold and red. Omero dropped his weapon and reached for her hand. "Let's go," he said. "Before the rest of them come." She hesitated, then nodded. Together, they walked through the ruins, a path paved with blood and smoke and unfinished truths. The night outside was bitter and cold, but the air felt like release. Behind them, the church burned, a pyre for lies, for cages, for the ghosts neither of them could yet name. If someone tore your world apart to protect you, could you ever forgive them, or would saving you only deepen the wound? Tell us what you think in the comments below. And if you're ready to see what happens after the fire, subscribe now. Karie's story is just beginning to burn. The drive back to the villa was quiet, the kind of silence that didn't ask to be filled. Karie sat in the back seat with her hands folded, a bandage wrapped around one palm, dried blood beneath her nails. Omero sat beside her, his shoulder stitched and stiff, the graze now hidden beneath a clean suit. He didn't speak. Not once. But every so often, she felt his eyes on her, like a man trying to memorize something he feared he'd lose. When they arrived, the guards parted without a word, heads bowed like they knew something sacred had been broken. The villa hadn't changed, but Karie had, and that made the walls feel smaller somehow. Valentina waited at the steps, her face stricken with restrained relief. Karie offered her a small nod, then walked straight past, not pausing until she reached the room she now knew too well. She didn't unpack. She didn't sit. A few hours later, Omero knocked, just once. She opened the door without a word. He stood in the hall, holding a slim black envelope. No guards. No theatrics. Just a man in need of something he didn't quite know how to ask for. Inside the room, he placed the envelope on the table. A passport. Your name. Your freedom. His voice was calm, but she could hear the tension coiled beneath each word. There's cash. A driver will take you anywhere you want to go. No one will follow. No one will touch you. Karie stared at him. Just like that. Omero met her eyes. You've earned it. She moved to the window, the lake glinting beyond the glass. What happens to you? He paused, then said quietly, I don't know. But I'll survive. It's what I do. Karie didn't respond. Her fingers toyed with the edge of the envelope, heart pulled in too many directions to land on one. I never expected to feel again, he said softly. Not after my mother. Not after my father. I built everything to keep people out, not let anyone in. And yet you dragged me in anyway, Karie murmured. Omero gave a small, sad smile. I didn't expect you. I didn't plan you. But you walked into my world and gave me something no one ever has. She turned toward him. And what's that? Choice, he said. A life that wasn't built on fear or debt or blood. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then why are you giving me an out? Because you're not mine, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Not unless you say so. The words settled between them like dust in sunlight. Karie looked down, then slowly picked up the envelope. She left that night. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't need to. The days passed in a haze of distance and motion. She traveled, not far, just enough to feel air on her face that didn't smell like consequence. A small town north of the city. A rented apartment with peeling wallpaper and an espresso machine she bought secondhand from a yard sale. She didn't make the blend. Not yet. She didn't check the news, but it found her anyway. The brevettas were collapsing. Omero was dismantling what remained, with precision, not vengeance. He left Tommaso's body in a hotel elevator. Clean. Quiet. Message received. Still, he hadn't reached out. And neither did she. Until the 7th day. That morning, she brewed herself a cup bitter, too strong, no spice, and set it on the windowsill. It didn't taste like home. It didn't taste like her. It tasted like unfinished business. So she packed. She didn't bring much. Just her clothes, her courage, and a worn-out recipe card with her grandmother's handwriting on it. She didn't call ahead. She didn't text. She arrived at the villa just before sunset. The guards recognized her instantly. No questions. No resistance. They opened the gate like they'd been waiting the whole time. Omero met her at the top of the steps. He didn't speak. She didn't either. Not at first. Then she walked straight up to him and said, I'll stay. His breath caught. You will. But from now on, she added, we do this my way. A beat passed. Then another. And then, finally, Omero smiled, not the smirk he wore when he was hunting or the grim twist of strategy. A real smile. Like something had come unknotted inside him. Finally, he said. Someone who tells me what to do. Karie laughed, short and surprised, the tension draining from her shoulders. You needed someone to challenge you. No, he replied. I needed someone who could see me. They stood there in the dusk, two people shaped by ruin and rebuilt by something softer. Not ownership. Not obligation. But choice. And for the first time since this began, Karie felt something real settle in her chest, not fear, not survival, but belonging on her terms. The café smelled like orange zest and fresh paint. Karie stood behind the counter, her hands dusted with cinnamon, steam curling upward from the polished espresso machine like memory itself. The place was smaller than before, but brighter, cream walls, walnut counters, copper fixtures that caught the sun through wide windows. A new name curved in gold lettering across the glass, La Cura Chicago. Not just a cafe now, but a reclamation. It had taken weeks of late nights, permit battles, and quiet negotiations to get the doors open again. Omero had handled the logistics, letting Karie handle the soul. The neighborhood had changed in her absence, but the regulars returned like clockwork. Old men playing chess in the corner. Nurses from the clinic down the block. They whispered about the woman who vanished and came back stronger, and about the man who followed her like a shadow in designer shoes. Omero hadn't stopped being who he was. But around her, something in him softened. He still made people nervous, still carried a name that made politicians check over their shoulders. Yet when he stepped into La Cura, people saw something else, the way he looked at Karie like she was the only real thing in the room. He never smiled at anyone but her. And when he did, it was like watching a fault line mend itself. Karie had started to smile more too. She found peace in the rhythm again, warming cups by hand, swirling foam into soft spirals, dusting each espresso with her grandmother's blend. The orange and cinnamon were familiar, but it was the lavender that always made her pause. Every time she reached for it, she remembered the basement, the fire, the quiet violence of survival. But she used it anyway, not to bury the past, but to acknowledge it. That morning, the cafe buzzed with a gentle hum, soft jazz through the speakers, the scrape of chairs, spoons clinking in ceramic. Karie moved behind the bar with her sleeves rolled and her apron tied neat at her waist. Her fingers worked automatically, muscle memory guiding her through the motions of something that had once saved her life. Coffee, she had learned, could be a weapon or a welcome, depending on who was holding the cup. She finished a double shot with her signature touch, a swirl of spiced foam, a sliver of orange zest on the saucer, and slid it to a waiting customer. "Enjoy," she said. The woman thanked her, already sipping, eyes closing in pleasure. Karie turned to prep the next when the door opened, and the air shifted. Omero walked in, dressed in dark jeans and a gray button-down, sleeves rolled up to the forearm. No suit. No guards. No armor. Just him. She didn't say a word. He crossed the cafe slowly, like he had all the time in the world. Patrons glanced up, then quickly looked away out of caution, curiosity, or both. But Karie didn't flinch. She waited until he reached the counter, her hands resting lightly on the warm marble. He leaned forward, eyes dancing. "Who made this coffee?" he asked, lips curving in that rare, wolfish smile. Karie tilted her head, matching his tone. "I did." He picked up the cup she'd already set aside, his blend, made minutes before he arrived, and took a long, slow sip. The crema clung to the rim like gold. His eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, they were softer than anyone else in the room would ever see. He set the cup down. Then, without a word, he reached across the counter and took her hand, lifting it gently to his lips. "Perfect," he said, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. As always. The cafe kept moving around them, unaware or pretending not to notice. But in that moment, it was just the two of them, a woman who had once been taken, and a man who had learned to let go. The bitter and the sweet, held together in quiet balance. Outside, the city hummed, traffic thick, voices rising, life rushing past. Inside, the air was warm, the lights low, and the world slowed to the sound of one last espresso machine sighing its breath. Here, in this small corner of Chicago, there were no cages. No enemies. No whispers that mattered. Just Karie. Just Omero. And a cup of coffee that had started it all. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.